Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Liverpool Hope University. You're all very welcome on this wonderful sunny afternoon, and I hope you're really looking forward to this really important event. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Penny Horn. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Provost here at Hope. I bring with me the best greetings of the Vice-Chancellor, who is unfortunately not very well this evening. So I'm here in his place, and he sends his really great greetings to all of you, and particularly to Professor Kelly on this great event. So we're really proud of the academic progress we've made here at Liverpool Hope over the last few years. We're really proud of a new crop of professors, which we've just made, and we're in the middle of a series of inaugural lectures, which allows them to tell you their story in terms of Hope and in terms of their research and in terms of where they think the university should go and what their part of that will be. It's been a really exciting series so far, and I'm really interested to hear what Professor Kelly has to say this evening. Before we get started, there's a lot of welcomes to give, so I'm particularly pleased to welcome Stephen's parents and parents-in-law, and particularly Stephen's wife, who you're really welcome, and Stephen's brother, all of whom are here with us to celebrate this wonderful event. I know there are also lots of colleagues and friends from Ireland, from Northern Ireland, and from across the UK, and you're all very welcome, as indeed are all of our local colleagues and friends, and particularly a group of Stephen's students who I know are here this evening. So I think that's a really great tribute to Stephen in his new chair, that his students are here this evening. I think that's a wonderful thing. So it's a great welcome to all of you. It's a really big welcome to our new professor, Professor Kelly. We were very proud to see him able to do this tonight. And I'm going to introduce the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research, Professor Naga, who's going to introduce Stephen to you formally. To you.
May I just add my own welcome to that of the Deputy Vice-Chancellor. It is always a great pleasure to be asked to say a few words by way of introduction on these occasions, and as always, I am pleased to have this opportunity. Professor Kelly is the most recent addition to the Hope's Professoriate, a body of distinguished academics that the university has spent a great deal of time building up over the past several years. Professor Kelly has been given a personal chair as Professor of Modern Irish History for his sustained and distinguished academic career and research profile. He joined Liverpool Hope in October 2012. Prior to coming to Hope, he earned his doctoral degree in 2010 from the University College Dublin, and soon after that, he held a postdoctoral fellowship funded by the Irish Research Council for the Humanities and Social Science at the University College Dublin. He was also an evening lecturer at the School of History and Archives at the same institution, University College Dublin. During his almost 10 years at Hope, Professor Kelly has been an active member of the university community. He is a passionate educator, dedicated to learning and teaching excellence, and his priority has always focused on student experience. Working closely alongside his academic colleagues, he has updated, rejuvenated the undergraduate and postgraduate history curriculum, and he has also always placed great emphasis on supporting and promoting early career researchers within his subject areas. Currently, he is the subject lead for history, politics, and international relations at this university. Professor Kelly has wide and varied research interests, including modern British-Irish relations, the history of modern Ireland and Britain, varieties in European nationalism, European fascism, and the Holocaust, and Margaret Thatcher and Thatcherism. And indeed, he has published extensively in these areas, including 5 monographs, one edited collection, several book chapters, and over 15 peer-reviewed academic journal articles. In 2012, he published his first research monograph dedicated to the political and social views of Saint John Henry Newman, which was entitled A Conservative of Heart, the Political and Social Thought of John Henry Newman. The following year, in 2013, he published his second monograph entitled Fianna Fáil, Partition and Northern Ireland, and this book was based on the findings of his PhD thesis, and this groundbreaking monograph received widespread academic acclaim. In 2014, Professor Kelly, working alongside his colleague, Professor Bryce Evans, who is also present in this audience, published a pioneering edited collection entitled Frank Aiken, Nationalist and Internationalist, and this work focused on the life and political career of a previously neglected 20th century Irish icon, Frank Aiken. In 2016, Professor Kelly published a research monograph entitled A Failed Political Entity, Charles Hoey and the Northern Ireland Question. And this monograph on controversial Irish politician and statesman Charles Hoey received a widespread media attention and was lauded by the critics as one of the finest biographies of 2016. Professor Kelly's most recent monograph, published in 2021, entitled Margaret Thatcher, the Conservative Party and the Northern Ireland Conflict, offers the first critical insight into UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's public and private attitude to Northern Ireland question. He's currently finishing a forthcoming biography of Gerald Boland, Irish revolutionary and statesman, and this is due for publication in the year 2023. Let me highlight some of his noteworthy esteem indicators from among his many achievements. He is a visiting fellow at the Institute of Humanities, University College, Dublin. He was awarded the John Henry Newman Resident Fellowship in 2010. In 2017, he was the winner of the 2017 Book Prize awarded by Political Studies Association. Professor Kelly continues to secure funding in support of his research projects, including in recent years, the prestigious John Ancliffe Memorial Fund grant from Churchill Archives Centre, University of Cambridge. Professor Kelly is also a regular contributor to the media in Great Britain and Ireland, including the print media, the online medium, as well as television documentaries. And so, it is a genuine delight and joy for me to invite Professor Kelly to deliver to us his inaugural lecture entitled A Shared History, a Personal Reflection on the Northern Ireland Conflict and the Search for Truth and Reconciliation. Professor Kelly.
Good evening and welcome, Pro-Chancellor, Deputy Vice-Chancellors, Pro-Vice-Chancellor, distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, students, my family, and in particular my wife, Jenny, who I dedicate this paper to this evening. The dual themes of my lecture tonight Well, the central subject of my lecture this evening explores the dual themes of, firstly, a personal history and the role of an archival historian, and secondly, the search for truth and reconciliation in the context of the Northern Ireland conflict. As I examine, the Northern Ireland conflict has loomed large both in my public life as a professional historian and also in my private life. My parents and wider family are natives of Derry in Northern Ireland. Although I grew up in Dublin in the Republic of Ireland, I spent a great deal of my childhood and early adult life in Derry. Naturally, such experiences have shaped my worldview and influenced my love and my passion for history. It is indeed fitting today, the 27th of April, as many of you may know, is Freedom Day in South Africa, an annual celebration of South Africa's first non-racial democratic elections of 1994. In this context, I think it only appropriate that we remember and indeed celebrate the life of the late Desmond Tutu, a distinguished South African Anglican bishop, theologian, and anti-apartheid activist, who sadly passed away in December of last year. As I explore later in my lecture, Desmond Tutu, together with the late Nelson Mandela, the first president of the Republic of South Africa, played pioneering roles in the establishment of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the mid-1990s. Today, this commission is widely heralded as the most successful example of permitting a nation to heal the wounds of the past in the pursuit of a shared future. I suggest that the time may be opportune to create a South African-style Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the people of Northern Ireland. Now, my lecture this evening, which will run for approximately 35 minutes, focuses on four key parts. The first part focuses on the Northern Ireland conflict, providing an overview of those events. Second, I tell the story of Jerry and look at the role of the Derry Four. Third, I talk about my views on the idea of truth and reconciliation in the promotion of peace in Northern Ireland. And lastly, I'll just finish with a note about my research and how I think it can influence the process towards peace and reconciliation in the years ahead. Now, a little brief overview of the Northern Ireland conflict. The Northern Ireland conflict was a violent conflict from the late 1960s to 1998 between an overwhelmingly Protestant Unionists, or some would say loyalists, who desired the state to remain part of the United Kingdom, and the overwhelmingly Roman Catholic or nationalists, sometimes referred to as Republicans, who wanted Northern Ireland to become part of the Republic of Ireland. On the paramilitary Republican side were, of course, the Provisional IRA and associated terrorist organisations. On the paramilitary loyalist side were the Ulster Volunteer Force, the UVF, and the larger Ulster Defence Association. Now, the other non-political players in the conflict were the British Army, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, the RUC, and the part-time defence force, the Ulster Defence Regiment, the UDA. Marked by street fighting, sensational bombing, sniper attacks, roadblocks, and internment without trial, the conflict had the characteristics of a civil war, notwithstanding its textbook categorisation as a low-intensity conflict. Approximately 3,526 people died during the Northern Ireland conflict, and astonishingly, 30,000 more were wounded before a final solution or peaceful solution was delivered under the terms of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement of 1998. And I'll come to the Belfast Agreement later on in my paper. Now, the background to the conflict rests with the political divisions in Ireland, which found its origins in the various plantations by English and Scottish settlers, and particularly the plantations of Ulster in the early 17th century, which consolidated geographically by the early 20th century, with the signing of the Anglo-Irish Treaty in December of 1921. Now, this treaty ended the Anglo-Irish War, which was fought between Irish Republicans and the British state, which lasted from 1919 to 1921. This treaty also divided the Ireland into two separate entities, with Northern Ireland remaining part of the United Kingdom. The remaining 26 counties made up the newly constituted Irish Free State, which was the dominion of the United Kingdom, which is known today, of course, as the Republic of Ireland. From 1921 to 1972, Northern Ireland had its own devolved government, separate from the Parliament in Westminster. Now, the Northern Ireland government was a bigoted and sectarian administration controlled by an Ulster Unionist majority. As a result, Irish nationalists suffered discrimination, both politically, through gerrymandering of electoral districts, and also in the jobs market and allocation of public housing. In 1968 and 1969, heavy-handed policing of peaceful civil rights campaigners led to civil unrest and a revival of old paramilitary organisations. I'm referring here to, for example, the UVF and the Provisional IRA, or IRA. The Northern Ireland conflict had commenced by 1968-69. Now, the consequences of this explosion of civil unrest and violence had tragic and long-lasting impact on the people of Northern Ireland on both sides of the political and religious divide. Let me now turn to a case study to talk about the conflict through the prison of Derry, or Londonderry, and particularly the Bogside. By the early 1970s, Northern Ireland was engrossed in acts of wanton violence almost on a daily basis. People will recall turning on the TV and seeing those indiscriminate crimes being inflicted on the people of Northern Ireland. The brutality was immense. The city of Derry, or Londonderry, was not immune to these waves of violence and murder. 1972 was particularly a tragic year in the history and for the people of Derry. In the words of one informed author, by 1972, Derry was, quote, a troubled city with a divided society in a troubled and divided country. Now, I am, of course, specifically referring here to Bloody Sunday of the 30th of January 1972, when 13 civilians were killed by the British Army gunfire during a peaceful protest organised by the Civil Rights Association. In fact, 1972 was by far the bloodiest and deadliest year of the Northern Ireland conflict, with almost 500 people killed, half of them were civilians. This was, to quote Susan McKay, a sense of descent into terror. Most people didn't even get a visit from the police when their relatives were killed. It just seems unbelievable now. Indeed, the tragic events of Bloody Friday, in Belfast in July of 1972 encapsulated this sense of despair and utter futility of political violence. On this day, the Provisional IRA planted and exploded 22 bombs in which a space of 75 minutes, which killed 9 people and seriously injured approximately 130 other people. Now, let me just jump forward to the second part of my paper to tell Jerry's story, to give you an insight, a personal reflection on the conflict. It is at this time of my talk that I wish to jump forward to February 1979. Please let me tell you about Jerry's story. I use Jerry's story as a window into the past, as an opportunity to highlight the many injustices that were served on the people of Northern Ireland during the conflict. This is not a story about political violence or sectarianism. Rather, it is a reminder of how the Northern Ireland conflict impacted the whole of society, families and communities, the majority of whom despised violence and were vehemently opposed to paramilitarism. Now, Jerry was born on the 1st of September 1960 into a Catholic working-class family. His father, Rex, was a contracted roof tiler. His mother, Nellie, a stay-at-home mother. Jerry was the 5th born of 8 children. At 5 months old, the family were provided with social authority council housing in the Craigan estate in the Bogside of Derry. In pre-conflict torn Derry, Jerry had a normal childhood. He attended school regularly, played soccer for his local team, and enjoyed hanging out with his circle of friends. And when the Northern Ireland conflict broke out in the late 1960s, Jerry was too young to comprehend what was going on around him. His parents tried to distance Jerry and the other children from the conflict. The family had always been proud nationalists, but never supporters of Irish Republican violence, nor Sinn Féin. Rather, Gerry's parents placed his support behind the emerging non-sectarian anti-physical force political party, the Social Democratic and Labour Party, the SDLP, which were also founded by a Derry native, the late John Hume, who received the Nobel Peace Prize. By the time Gerry entered his teenage years, the conflict in Northern Ireland had unfortunately grown increasingly violent and sectarian. As we have learned, Derry was certainly not immune to the violence and killing. I draw your attention again to Bloody Sunday of January 1972. Gerry was one of thousands outside St Mary's Church where the funerals of the victims of Bloody Sunday took place. Excuse me. Gerry reached the milestone birthday of 18 in September 1978. He was now working full-time as a roofer alongside his father. At the weekends, he did whatever every other young man of his age did: socialised with friends in the local bars and nightclubs in Derry City. Up until this point, he had no political involvement, nor was he interested in joining the Provisional IRA's murder campaign. He was a typical young man of his age, carefree and enjoying life. Gerry's life, however, like that of his family, was forever changed following his arrest for his alleged involvement in the murder of a British Army soldier in February 1979. In late February 1979, 18-year-old Gerry was arrested by a unit of the British Army at his family home, 52 Circular Road, Craigandderry. Unbeknown to Gerry, 3 other teenagers who also came from the Craigan area of Derry, Stephen Crumlish, Jerry McGowan and Michael Toner, were also arrested as part of the British Army operation. The 4 teenagers were initially detained in Strand Road Police Station. An RUC police barracks located in the heart of the city of Derry. To the astonishment of the 4 detainees, they were accused of taking part in the murder of Lieutenant Stephen Andrew Kirby, a member of the British Army's Royal Welsh Fusiliers. Now, to put this into context, Gerry and his 3 co-accused were innocent of the offence. They were wrongfully accused of murder, a fact that was not acknowledged by the British state for almost 20 years. Lieutenant Kirby had been fatally wounded by a Provisional IRA combatant on Valentine's Day, 1979, while leading a British Army foot patrol. Lieutenant Kirby was on duty at a checkpoint at the junction of the Abercorn Road, overlooking the city's main bridge. He was struck in the chest by a single round and died shortly afterwards. He was 22 years of age. Many who died were mostly teenagers or young adults during the conflict. Following Lieutenant Kirby's murder, tensions were running extremely high in Derry. There was considerable pressure placed on the security forces, chiefly the RUC and the British Army, to catch Lieutenant Kirby's killer. Placed within this context, following their arrest, Gerry and his 3 co-accused were subject to 3 days of horrific interrogation by a group of RUC detectives at the Strand Road Police Holding Centre, which, judged on today's standards, amounted to modern-day torture. During the interrogation, Gerry and his 3 co-accused were denied access to a lawyer and legal advice. They were also refused access to their parents or family members. The full details of the physical, psychological and verbal torture inflicted on the 4 teenagers during their detention is too disturbing to air in this public forum. However, I'll provide one example. During one interview conducted on behalf of the RUC detectives, Jerry McGowan was subjected to threats of physical violence, including a threat by his interrogators that they could, if they so wished, rape his sister. It is therefore unsurprising that under duress and fearing for their own lives, together with that of their loved ones, Jerry and his three co-accused signed false confessions in relation to the murder of Lieutenant Kirby. On the sole basis of the false confessions, Jerry and his three co-accused were charged to appear in court. In the meantime, they were remanded in custody in Crumlin Road Jail, notorious jail in Belfast. They remained in custody for almost 6 weeks, until Jerry and his three co-accused were granted bail by the High Court in Belfast. They were then subjected to onerous bail conditions for the following year, including reporting to the police on a daily basis and subject to curfews. The trial against Jerry and his three co-accused commenced at the Belfast Crown Court on the 13th of October 1980. At the time of the prosecution, enormous efforts were made on behalf of Jerry's family, friends, community activists, local priests, and politicians to stop the false prosecution against him and his three co-accused. All 4 teenagers complied with a lie detector test arranged by Michael Toner's father with a US expert. They each passed the test. The results were submitted to the Director of Public Prosecutions in Northern Ireland, together with a larger volume of letters from local clergy and politicians, including Catholic Bishop of Derry, Edmund Daly. Despite such interventions, the prosecution against Jerry and his three co-accused continued. The trial commenced in Belfast Crown Court on the 13th of October 1980. During the trial, Jerry and his co-accused were given the extremely unusual concession of being released or admitted on bail. As far as I'm aware, it's the first time in the history of the British state that those accused of killing a member of the British Armed Forces were given bail. After 2 days of the trial, the so-called Derry Four, as they had become known, received advice from their lawyers and family members that considering the diplock court system, with witness judge sitting alone without a jury, their defence was futile. They were therefore advised to leave Northern Ireland immediately. Thus, aged 22 years of age, Jerry, together with his three co-accused, absconded illegally, leaving Northern Ireland with the hope of commencing a new life in the Irish Republic, the Republic of Ireland. Shortly afterwards, on the 16th of October 1980, the Belfast Crown Court issued bench warrants for the arrest on sight of the 4 men. For the next 20 years, Jerry and his three co-accused lived their lives under the shadow of the most serious and grave false accusations, with an active bench warrant from a court in Belfast hanging over their heads. They would not return to their native city of Derry for almost 20 years. With no money, no family, Jerry was nonetheless determined to start a new life in Dublin, free from the label of a killer and a terrorist. By Christmas 1980, Jerry was living in a small flat in Dublin. Shortly afterwards, Jerry's girlfriend, Anya, followed him to Dublin, leaving behind her family and friends. Initially, of course, life was extremely difficult for the young couple, living in a strange new city. They both managed to secure employment and gradually started to make a life for themselves in Ireland's capital city. On the 30th of January 1981, coincidentally the 9th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, Jerry and Anya were married in Buncrana, County Donegal. And for anyone who doesn't know, the Buncrana region shares a border with Derry, so family and friends could cross over for their wedding. The following year, in November 1982, Jerry and Anya had their first son, Stephen. And for anyone who hasn't guessed, I'm of course referring to myself. My birth was followed 3 years later with the arrival of my brother Connor in 1985. Over the next 20 years, Jerry and his family continued to reside in Dublin. Although Jerry and Anya each forged successful careers, Jerry always felt he was living a double life. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, fearful that his secret would be revealed. It was psychological torment. There was one traumatizing event that will forever live with Jerry. In 1986, his beloved father Rex suddenly passed away. Jerry was unable to attend his father's funeral in Derry. Instead, his father's coffin was brought across the border to Buncrana for Jerry to pay his last respects. Let me jump forward to 1998, and the context of this is the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. Somewhat out of the blue, in December of 1998, the Director of Public Prosecutions confirmed in writing, having reviewed the case of the Derry Four, that he did not intend, quote, to offer any evidence on any charges against Jerry and his three co-accused. Out of the blue. On the 21st of December 1998, Jerry, together with his three co-accused, Stephen Crumlish, Michael Toner and Jerry McGowan, at a hearing in the Belfast Crown Court, which I also attended at the time, I was 16, I will never forget it, were found not guilty for the murder of Lieutenant Kirby. The 1998 directed acquittals simply confirmed, without doubt, the innocence of Jerry and his three co-accused. However, what they did not have was the truth about how this miscarriage of justice had occurred. They would spend a further 20 years for the truth. There was no formal apology on behalf of the British state. In 2000, Patricia Coyle, working on behalf of Hart, Coyle, Collins, solicitors and advocates, initiated a civil action on behalf of the Derry Four against the Chief Constable of the PSNI. Several writs were issued at the High Court in Belfast against the Chief Constable, including wrongful arrest, false imprisonment, assault, battery, trespass to a person. In 2003, Paul O'Connor and Sarah Duddy of the Pat Finucane Centre lodged complaints to the Office of the Police Ombudsman in Northern Ireland on behalf of Jerry and his three co-accused. Over the subsequent years, Jerry's legal team pursued a relentless civil case in pursuit of information concerning the original RUC police investigations, which I referred to earlier on as torture. Several discovery requests were issued against not only the Chief Constable, but also the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Department of Justice, the Northern Ireland Office, and MI5, the Security Services. In total, 21 court reviews took place before a judge at the High Court in Belfast. In 2012, following a lengthy investigation on behalf of the Police Ombudsman of Northern Ireland, the Public Prosecution Service of Northern Ireland decided to bring charges against two former RUC detectives involved in the interrogation of Jerry and his three co-accused. Consequently, in July 2014, the two former RUC detectives appeared at Londonderry's Magistrate Court, accused of preventing the course of justice by falsifying statements purported to have been written by Jerry and his co-accused during their interrogation in February of 1979. Both men denied the charges. Now, to the frustration of Jerry and his co-accused, in January 2015, it was announced that the two former RUC detectives had been formally cleared of preventing the course of justice in relation to the case I mentioned. This decision was on foot of the prosecution's intention that it was to offer, quote, no evidence in respect to the charges made against the two former RUC detectives. I do not have the time this evening to go into any further detail. Suffice to say that the Police Ombudsman of Northern Ireland were to blame for the decision not to prosecute the two former RUC detectives. Following the collapse of the investigation, the PSNI was called in to look at how the complaint by the Derry Four was investigated by the Police Ombudsman of Northern Ireland. Eventually, in May of 2018, Jerry's legal team received several volumes of discovery material. These documents gave Jerry some, but not all, of the truth. Some of the facts uncovered, including the startling revelation that the original RUC documents relating to Jerry's case, including the signed confessions, had been destroyed. If Jerry and his co-accused had been given access to these documents, they could have been forensically tested to determine whether the statements were tampered with. In January 2019, Jerry and his three co-accused reached an out-of-court settlement in relation to their civil action against the Northern Ireland Chief Constable of the PSNI. The settlement came, quote, with no acceptance of liability on the part of the police. In a statement, the PSNI Assistant Chief Constable George Clark acknowledged that there had been, quote, significant shortcomings in the treatment of Jerry and his co-accused. Continue to quote, "We recognise the distress that this has caused him," he said. "This is reflected in the settlement provisions." I continue, "Policing has developed greatly since these incidents took place, as have our policies and procedures for dealing with detained prisoners." I leave the final word in this part to Jerry, just above us here in the slide. We're in our 50s, nearly early 60s now. Sometimes you look back and you say, where did your life go? We had no teenage years. We had no fun. We didn't enjoy life. 20 years of being on the run was devastating, especially when we lost loved ones. I lost 3 members of my family and couldn't attend any of their funerals. This is for them, for the loved ones who aren't here today. Now, I've given in the last 20 minutes or so a personal reflection of the Northern Ireland conflict and how it's impacted me personally and also my family. I want to now bring the narrative more broadly within the historical narrative of the conflict and where we can go in the future in terms of reconciliation. So the Good Friday Agreement of 1998 played a significant role in helping to bring the Northern Ireland conflict to an end, including in relation to the Derry Four, and conversely promoted reconciliation over antagonism in the pursuit of peace building. The agreement included a series of measures that addressed the legacies of the conflict, including reform of policing, disarmament of armed groups, decommissioning, the release of conflict-related prisoners, the provision of services to victims, and a review of the criminal justice system. Indeed, taking time to read through the text of the Accord, it is striking how much of the language promotes the theme of reconciliation. In theory, at least, the signatories agreed to end violence and share government, promote reconciliation, and accept equality and human rights in a spirit of, quote, partnership, equality, and mutual respect. For the signatories of the Good Friday Agreement, it was envisaged in the future that Northern Ireland would be a shared and the bitter divisions of the past replaced with, quote, friendship, mutual respect, and partnership. Now, the agreement was ratified by the British and Irish governments, signed by all major parties in Northern Ireland, with the exception, of course, of the Democratic Unionist Party, and approved through two referenda by massive majorities in both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Universal, almost, support. As such, it was hoped that reconciliation could provide a language of peace, that former enemies could promote and live by dual principles of internal inclusivity and internal national equality. Violence and murder had no place in this new Northern Ireland. The traditional confrontational narratives of British versus Irish, Protestant versus Catholic, Unionist versus Nationalist were to be transcended by, not opposed to, a contrasting narrative of sharing over separation, and most of all, reconciliation over conflict. Yet, the Good Friday Agreement did not deliver, nor could it ever have delivered, absolute reconciliation across the political and social fabric of Northern Ireland society. In fact, the idea of a comprehensive mechanism for addressing outstanding truth and justice issues is actually strikingly absent from the Accord. Now, this process was always going to be a painful and torturous journey. Indeed, almost immediately, it was obvious that the failure to ensure Irish Republican decommissioning left Ulster Unionists fearful of a return to violence, and their fears were genuine and legitimate. Thus, ever since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, the path towards reconciliation has been constantly hampered by the failure to establish stable political relationships amongst the political parties in Northern Ireland, together, I would argue, with a failure on behalf of the UK and Irish governments to agree to a common strategy in the pursuit of reconciliation. The consequence, in the words of Duncan Morrow, writing in 2012, this is 10 years ago, quote, have been to cement social division and the latent antagonism which remains at risk of future instability. And we should note, even today, the Northern Ireland Executive has been collapsed by the bickering amongst the political parties in Northern Ireland. This is ongoing. Despite the many obstacles, there have been several successful interventions on the path towards reconciliation. For example, the International Commission on Policing was established in 1998, followed by a Commission for Human Rights and a Commission for Equality, both established in 1999. In 2005, the Northern Ireland Assembly adopted a so-called a shared future plan, which focused on the promotion of community relations. Indeed, in 2008, the Commissions for Victims and Survivors was established, with the explicit mission to, quote, address the needs of all victims and survivors by ensuring excellent service provision, acknowledging the legacy of the past, and building for a better future. But what about today? The events cited above occurred almost 15 years ago. What about during the last several years? How successful has Northern Ireland's path towards reconciliation really been? I would argue strongly that we should move beyond viewing the Good Friday Agreement and more broadly the Northern Ireland peace process as some commentators have suggested, a remarkable triumph for reconciliation. Now, of course, it was the beginning, and of course, it ended the armed conflict, but it didn't address many of the key issues around reconciliation and legacy issues which to speak about. Let me give you just one example. This is astonishing. There are more so-called peace walls in operation in Northern Ireland today than ever in the history of the Northern Ireland state. So-called peace walls, the physical barriers that divide communities based on politics and religion. As such, we must deal with the present realities and outstanding legacy of issues which genuinely threaten to tear apart almost 30 years of peace building. And unfortunately, even today, antagonism, not reconciliation, for me anyway, seem to consume the interests of the political elite in Northern Ireland. In fact, I would argue that in some ways we have gone backwards rather than forwards concerning legacy-related issues. And this is largely due to the ideological stance of the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Conservative government in Westminster. The Stormont House Agreement of 2014, signed by Boris Johnson's predecessor Theresa May, made, quote, a commitment to a number of new initiatives around legacy cases. As part of this agreement, in June of 2016, a commission for flags, identity, culture and tradition were established, comprised of representatives of the main Northern Ireland political parties. That's progress. Significantly, the agreement committed the political parties in Northern Ireland to deal with issues related to the past. It was envisaged under the terms of the accord that, quote, as part of the transition to long-term peace and stability, the participants agreed that an approach to dealing with the past was necessary with respect in several principles, including 1. Promoting reconciliation, 2. Upholding the rule of law, 3. Acknowledging and addressing the sufferings of victims and survivors, and 4, and lastly, facilitating the pursuit of justice and information recovery. The Stormont House Agreement also struck a deal to establish, by 2016, an oral history archive to provide, quote, a central place for people from all backgrounds and from throughout the United Kingdom and Ireland to share experiences and narratives related to the conflict. It was envisaged that this archive would be independent and free from political interference, and that a research project would be established as part of the archive, led by academics, to produce a factual historical timeline and statistical analysis of the Northern Ireland conflict within 12 months. This is in 2016. A further important milestone of the Stormont House Agreement in relation to legacy-related issues was the recommendation to establish a historical investigations unit, an independent body charged with examining unresolved murders, those carried out by the RUC, including those carried out by the RUC and the British Army during the Northern Ireland conflict, as well, of course, as paramilitaries on both sides of the community. The arrival of Boris Johnson in 2019, however, witnessed a dramatic U-turn on behalf of the UK government's commitment concerning legacy-related issues. The 2000 publication, New Decade, New Approach, signed on behalf of the UK and Irish governments, together with the majority of the political parties in Northern Ireland, committed to a watered-down version of the Stormont House Agreement concerning legacy-related issues. Indeed, although the UK government, in signing up to New Decade, New Approach, made a commitment to publish and introduce legislation to the UK Parliament to implement the Stormont House Agreement to address the Northern Ireland legacy issues within 100 days, this, of course, never happened. As we gather here this evening, no progress has been made regarding the above objectives established under the Stormont House Agreement and including the New Decade, New Approach in relation to legacy-related issues. In fact, spurred on by the DUP protests under Boris Johnson's premiership, the UK government has committed a complete U-turn on the issue of legacy and the Northern Ireland conflict. In July 2021, The Guardian confirmed previous leaked reports that Johnson's government had abandoned a commitment to establish a historical investigations unit as agreed under the terms of the Stormont House Agreement. I just want to touch upon the issue of a blanket amnesty now in terms of the conflict. In July 2021, the current Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Brandon Lewis, announced that the UK government intended to ban all legal investigations into the Northern Ireland conflict related to murders and atrocities in the years before the signing of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in 1998. Bluntly put, by seeking to pass this legislation, the UK government is attempting to introduce a blanket amnesty for murderers within the Loyalist and Republican paramilitary organisations and members of the British Armed Forces, the PSNI, the RUC formerly, and elements of British intelligence, namely MI5. Indeed, such legislation, if enacted, would include a ban on all, quote, current and future legal investigations, including civil cases, tribunals, inquests and inquiries. This will include the approximately 1,500 cases on the Police Service of Northern Ireland's Legacy Investigation Book. It will also include legacy investigations by the Police Ombudsman of Northern Ireland. Now, to put the UK government's announcement into perspective, one should be aware that of the approximately 3,000 killings carried out during the Northern Ireland conflict, almost 3,000 killings carried out during the Northern Ireland conflict have never been resolved or solved. Many were not investigated. Some families never even received a visit from the police. Now, the response from the families of those murdered during the Northern Ireland conflict ranged from expressions of anger, grief and despair since Lewis's recent announcement. As Susan McKay has explained, relatives, quote, of the dead and injured, who thought they could not be hurt any more than they have already been, have discovered that the fresh pain is indeed available. Hard tears have been shed by the people who felt they had no more tears left. Indeed, McKay, who is stinging in her criticism of the UK government's handling of Northern Ireland, is absolutely correct in her assessment of the Boris Johnson government's views of the North, in which I would describe them as they are just sick to the teeth of the conflict. They are sick of the fractious politicians, of the issue that seems for forever to go on, insolvable. Indeed, the facts support my argument. For example, in the 2019 poll, it revealed that most Conservative Party voters favoured Northern Ireland leaving the UK for the sake of Brexit. Now, I'm not this evening going to have a discussion on the Northern Ireland backstop, because that's a whole different lecture for a different time. Moreover, there is clear evidence that the majority of Northern Ireland's population does not agree with the UK government's stance on the issue of political amnesty. In 2019, for example, the Northern Ireland office found that, quote, a clear majority opposed any form of amnesty or statute of limitations, arguing that this could, quote, damage the process of reconciliation, and that the UK government said it would, quote, move forward sensitively and with as much consensus as possible. Now, to defend the UK government's proposal, Boris Johnson claimed that a new statute of limitations is required to deal with, quote, the vexatious attempts to prosecute former soldiers, and that the UK government's actions are, as he describes them, in the interest of reconciliation. Let me just turn now to the final part of my paper. The idea of establishing a South African-style Truth and Reconciliation Commission has long been part of the discourse around how to deal with outstanding issues regarding legacy in Northern Ireland. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it is widely heralded as the most successful example of permitting a nation to heal the wounds of the past in the pursuit of a shared future. Essentially, the Commission was a court-like body established by the new South African government in 1995 to help heal the country and, quote, bring about reconciliation of its people by uncovering the truth about human rights violations that had occurred during the period of apartheid. Significantly, the Commission's emphasis was, quote, on gathering evidence and uncovering information from both victims and perpetrators, and not on prosecuting individuals for past crimes. As mentioned, led by the late Desmond Tutu and supported by Nelson Mandela, the Commission promoted a message of forgiveness and at the same time helped to establish a compelling frame of reference for moving beyond atrocities uncovered. And it was, as I said, it was extremely successful. Most recently, in the context of the Northern Ireland conflict, in October of 2019, this proposal was again raised by the UK Parliament's Defence and Select Committee and was influenced by a number of criminal proceedings related to the members of the British Armed Forces who had experienced active service in Northern Ireland during the Northern Ireland conflict. This initiative, first used in South Africa, controversially would give witness immunity from prosecution, and that's the big issue. In recent years, this proposal has garnered support from a cohort of Conservative Party backbenchers, many of whom have demanded that Boris Johnson's government take action to halt historical prosecutions of former British Army soldiers who served in Northern Ireland unless compelling new evidence emerged. In March 2019, for example, a former British soldier known as Soldier F was prosecuted for 2 murders and 5 attempted murders in relation to Bloody Sunday, which I mentioned earlier on. Now, I would point towards a note of caution. We should tread very carefully in supporting such calls for the establishment of a Northern Ireland Conflict, Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I'll provide 2 reasons for that. I'm not opposed to the idea, I'm just wary that there are some stumbling blocks. Number 1, providing blanket amnesty for murderers within loyalist and Republican paramilitary organisations, together with members of the British Army and the PSNI and elements of the British intelligence, namely MI5, doesn't have the support of the majority of the population of Northern Ireland. Number 2, South Africa's version was part of a final political settlement. A true commission in Northern Ireland would not be. The struggle for unification of Ireland in a single non-British political jurisdiction persists. So whatever truths a commission were to dig up would quickly be converted into political weapons. Immediately the truth would fuel, not heal. So just to draw things to a conclusion, a little note about my own future research. Over the coming years, I intend to dedicate my research and publications to address the legacy of the Northern Ireland conflict placed within the wider historical parameters. I plan to undertake my biggest and most ambitious research project to date, an oral history of the British Army and the Northern Ireland conflict, Operation Banner. This is a long-term project which realistically will take several years to complete. I'm fully aware that this project will not come without difficulties, chiefly concerning securing interviews with retired and serving members of the British Army, together with the invariable minefield in terms of ethical procedures, and we're all very aware of those procedures. Given my experience in personal and professional connections, I am confident I can overcome such obstacles. So just to bring things to a conclusion. In my lecture this evening, I have explored the dual themes of, firstly, a personal history and the role of an archival historian, and secondly, the ongoing search for truth and reconciliation in the context of the Northern Ireland conflict. Now, for me personally, as I hope you now appreciate, both themes are intimately linked through my personal experience and my passion for history. In the years ahead, I hope that I can share my experiences to help facilitate our collective pursuit for truth and reconciliation. And I just finished from a quote from the late Desmond Tutu. Exclusion is never the way forward on. Exclusion is never the way forward on our shared paths to freedom and justice. Go raibh míle maith agat, and thank you.
So again, a big thank you to Stephen. I'm going to ask Professor Cuthbertson, who's the head of School of Humanities, to give a vote of thanks to Professor Kelly.
I've got varifocals since I last used this lectern, so I've now got to try and read my script. Good. Professor Kelly, thank you for that wonderful lecture. A moving, eloquent, memorable, and important insight into your research and your own life. And it's lovely to see that your friends and family have been able to join you for this occasion. You even had lovely weather for it today, by which I mean that it's boiling hot in this room. But brilliant weather, brilliant lecture. And appropriately, the campus has gone Irish green for you in the spring weather. You gave us history that is alive, living history, and history that is personal, history that brings tears to the eyes and speaks to the heart as well as to the head. In your case, it is personal history, literally your childhood, your family, your background, lived history. But beyond that, I mean that you have shown that the study of history is not simply the study of the past, ultimately. It is the study of the present and the future, of humanity and of our living relationship with the past. You are Professor of Modern Irish History and British-Irish Relations, to give your full title. You may well be the first person to hold such a title, and a fine, well-deserved one it is too. And those British-Irish relations were explored sensitively and perceptively in your lecture, as they are in your monographs on Margaret Thatcher, the Conservative Party and the Northern Ireland conflict, on Charles Haughey and the Northern Ireland question, and on Fianna Fáil, partition and Northern Ireland. But also, British-Irish relations is one of the themes in your first book, based on your postdoctoral work, a monograph on a rather different subject and period, the political and social thought of John Henry Newman. Cardinal Newman, in his The Idea of a University, rejects professors who are, in his words, mere abstractions and phantoms, marrowless in their bones and without speculation in their eyes, who only open their mouths on their own special subject and in their scientific pedantry were dead to the world. You, Stephen, have shown how in your research and as a teacher, you are, I'm pleased to say, not dead to the world, but engaged with it thoroughly, personally. No mere abstraction or phantom, but a colleague, a leader, a mentor, and a friend. Newman does at one point express a preference for a university that has no professors. That's a hypothetical preference. But Liverpool Hope is very pleased to have you here as a member of its professoriate. I'm also tempted to quote Newman again, rather pompous though he could be, since he said that in your advancement, Ireland is advanced. In your advancement in what is good and what is true, in knowledge, in learning, in cultivation of mind, I am contemplating the honour and renown of the island of the saints. I told you he was pompous. But that's enough of Englishmen. Let me turn to Seamus Heaney, the poet from Castle Dawson in County Derry, whose passport was green. Famous lines in Heaney's The Cure at Troy have been interpreted as a reference to both South Africa and Northern Ireland, two places you addressed today. And the lines were referenced by Bill Clinton in Derry in 1995, a visit that many people now associate with Derry girls. And Clinton referenced the lines again subsequently, and then they were repeatedly quoted by Joe Biden too, and quoted at Biden's inauguration. In The Cure at Troy, Heaney tells us that hope and history rhyme. He says, the innocent in jails beat on their bars together. A hunger striker's father stands in the graveyard dumb. The police widow in veils faints at the funeral home. History says, don't hope on this side of the grave. But then, once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. Professor Kelly, you have recorded and contextualized that rhyme of hope and history, and you have, in your own way, made hope and history rhyme, if we give hope a capital H. You and your colleagues have made history a strong, successful subject here, in both teaching and research. We are confident that you will continue to contribute to that success and enjoy further success as a researcher. And we are grateful to have you as our colleague. On behalf of everyone at Liverpool Hope and everyone joining you today in this room, I congratulate you on your appointment as a Professor of Modern Irish History and British-Irish Relations in the School of Humanities here at Liverpool Hope University. Thank you.
So, tradition dictates that we acknowledge this evening and give Stephen a little memento of this occasion. Before we do that, I wonder, under the circumstances, whether we all could say thank you to Anya and Jerry and indeed Connor for sharing their story with us tonight. So, Stephen, this is for you, a little memorial of tonight. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for coming. I think we've had a wonderful evening. This series continues. We have many more inaugural lectures over the next few weeks, and it would be lovely to see all of you there. Thank you very much, and good evening. So, are you going to take